All right, so I've got this house. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I've lived here for 10 years, working my butt off to pay it off, and I'm finally at a place where I can say I own it. It's just a 3-bedroom house, comfortable, and most importantly, it's my space. You know the feeling when you've worked hard for something and you can finally enjoy it? That's where I'm at, Dot. Then there's my sister Jane. She's 29 and married to Alex, who's 31. They're the free spirits, always talking about how life is meant to be lived to the fullest, not stuck in the grind. They've always been the type to dream about escaping the 9-to-5 life and traveling the world. Honestly, I didn't think they'd ever go through with it because, well, life and bills, right? But they actually did it. They sold their house, their actual home, where their 2 kids, Emily, who's 7, and Lucas, who's 5, have lived their whole lives and decided to travel the world for a year. Yep, comma. You read that right. They sold everything for this dream vacation, thinking they'd made a killing on the sale of their house and could live off the profits while working odd jobs. They figured it would last them a year of traveling. I watched all this unfold, thinking, okay, cool for them, but this sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, especially with 2 kids. Fast forward a couple of months, and I'm at home, minding my own business when I get a call from Jane. I hadn't heard much from them since they left, just the occasional Instagram post showing off their adventures. So I figured it would be another call where she bragged about how amazing their new lifestyle was. But as soon as I picked up, I could tell something was off. Jane sounded stressed. Really stressed. Turns out, they'd blown through their money way faster than expected. 2 months in, and they were almost broke. Apparently, living like you're on vacation is expensive. Shocker, right? They stayed in nice places, ate out all the time, and lived it up. But when you're not working, that money doesn't last, especially with 2 kids who need stability. Now, they were stuck. No funds to keep traveling, no desire to settle down and buy another house just yet. And here's where I come in. They asked if they could move in with me. Not just for a couple of weeks either. They wanted to move in for 10 months, rent-free. Just Jane, Alex, and their 2 kids in my house for nearly a year while they figured things out. I didn't even know how to respond. I love my sister, don't get me wrong, but this is my house. I didn't work for a decade to let 4 people take over my space. Plus, I've got a routine. I enjoy my peace and quiet, and I couldn't even imagine what life would be like with 2 kids running around and a whole family invading my space. So, I told her no. I explained that my house was too small and that it wouldn't work. I even offered to help them find an affordable rental nearby, or give them some money for a couple of months to help them get back on their feet. But apparently that wasn't enough. Jane lost it. She called me selfish and said I didn't care about family. She even had the nerve to say I was jealous of their adventurous lifestyle. Jealous? Really? Now, I was getting angry. It wasn't about jealousy. It was about boundaries. I don't owe them a place to live just because they made some bad choices and didn't plan ahead. Life doesn't always go as planned, but they sold their house without a backup plan, and now they wanted me to fix it. And here's where things get even better. Jane went and got our parents involved. Now our parents live in a tiny apartment so they couldn't take them in, but instead of understanding my side, they started pressuring me to let Jane and her family move in. My mom kept going on about how family helps family and how I should be more understanding of their situation. She told me I didn't understand the value of experiences and that I should be supportive. I offered to help in other ways. I offered to help find them a place and even give them some money. But apparently, that's not enough. They want the whole package, my house, my space for free for almost a year. The worst part? They're not even planning to settle down. They're still talking about taking trips if they find cheap deals, meaning they want to live in my house rent-free while still being free spirits whenever they feel like it. How does that make any sense? So now, I'm stuck. Jane isn't talking to me, my parents are mad at me, and even some mutual friends are saying I'm being too harsh. But am I? It's not like I'm kicking them when they're down. I offered help, just not in the form of giving up my house for nearly a year. Is it really so wrong to say no when someone asks for way too much? It's frustrating because it feels like everyone's ignoring the fact that they made this mess. I didn't tell them to sell their house without a plan. I didn't ask them to blow through their savings in 2 months. But somehow, I'm the bad guy for not wanting to deal with the fallout. I don't think I'm being unreasonable. I just want to live in my own home without feeling like I have to take on someone else's problems. And the worst part is, I have this sinking feeling that this isn't over. Jane's pissed, my parents are disappointed, and I can already tell that this is going to cause way more drama than I'm ready for. After the first awkward phone call with Jane, I figured that was it. I told her no, made my stance clear, and assumed they'd cool off and figure something out. Boy, was I wrong. A week later, on a Saturday morning, I was relaxing, enjoying my usual routine, probably watching TV or scrolling through my phone, when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was a little thrown off. I opened the door, and there they were, Jane, Alex, and their 2 kids, Emma and Lucas, standing on my doorstep. No heads up, no text, nothing. They were smiling like they expected me to be thrilled to see them. Meanwhile, I was standing there already feeling uncomfortable. I knew what was coming. It wasn't just a casual visit. It was the kind of tense situation where someone's about to drop a bombshell, and you're the one who has to defuse it. Jane started with small talk, asking how I'd been, how work was going, and all that. But I could sense the real reason they were there just hanging in the air like we were circling around the main issue. After a few minutes, Alex finally got to the point. "Brian, we've been thinking about what you said on the phone," he started, but Jane cut in. Of course, she's the one who takes charge in their relationship. "We know you said having us live here wouldn't work, but we really believe it can," she said, her voice full of hope. "It's just 10 months. We won't be any trouble. The kids will stay out of your way and we'll keep everything clean." I stood there for a second, trying to figure out how to respond. They were acting like living here was no big deal, like 2 kids could just magically blend into the background. I knew it wouldn't be that simple. But I didn't want to blow up, so I asked the obvious question. What's the plan after the 10 months? Are you going to settle down, get another house, or find stable work? That's when they exchanged awkward glances. It was clear they hadn't thought it through. Jane eventually spoke up, trying to sound confident. "We're still figuring that part out," she said. "We might go back to traveling if things work out. We've been checking for cheap flights, and there's a chance we could get back on the road by the end of the year." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were broke, living off nothing, but still talking about catching cheap flights to continue their adventures. It didn't make any sense. How were they planning to take care of their kids, pay for food, and live like that? So I tried to be polite. I told them I understood they were in a tough spot, but I wasn't comfortable with the idea. My house wasn't set up for 4 extra people, especially not for 10 months. I explained that it would disrupt my life completely. Jane's hopeful expression disappeared and she crossed her arms, glaring at me. "Are you serious, Brian? We're family. Family helps each other out. You've got all this space and it's just you living here. What's the big deal?" Now I was getting frustrated. It wasn't about the space, it was about my life. I had worked hard to have this home, and I valued my peace and quiet, but I tried to stay calm. "It's not just about space," I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "It's about my routine and my mental health. I like having my own space, and I've worked hard for it. I'm happy to help you in other ways, but having you all live here for nearly a year isn't going to work." At this point, Alex tried to jump in. "What if we help around the house? We could cook, clean, do whatever you need. We'll be out during the day so you won't even notice we're here." I almost laughed, but I held it in. I knew there was no way I wouldn't notice 4 extra people in my house, especially with 2 kids around. Plus, the idea that they'd be out during the day was ridiculous. They didn't have any money to spend on daily outings, so where would they even go? "I appreciate the offer, but no," I said firmly. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this." That's when Jane completely lost it. Her face turned red, and she practically exploded. "You're so selfish!" she shouted. "You've always been stingy, Brian. You have no idea what it means to really live. You've never taken any risks. You're just a boring guy with a boring life, and now you're too jealous to help us out." That hit a nerve, but I kept my cool. "This isn't about jealousy," I said, my voice firm. "This is about boundaries. You and Alex made a choice. You sold your house and didn't plan ahead, and now you want me to take responsibility for that. It's not my fault, and it's not fair to put this on me." She wasn't having it. We wouldn't be asking if we had any other option, she yelled. But this is what family does, Brian. Family helps each other out when things get tough. I thought you of all people would understand that. Alex stood behind her, silent and uncomfortable, while Jane continued to rant. She went on about how I didn't understand their vision for life, how inspired they were by their travels, and how they didn't want to settle for a boring suburban life. All I could think was, yeah, but you need money for that, don't you? In the end, I told them again that I wasn't going to let them move in. They stormed out, Jane muttering something about how they'd figure it out without my help. As soon as they left, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. I didn't want to keep arguing, but I had a gut feeling this wasn't over, and I was right. Things got worse. I thought after Jane and Alex stormed out of my place, that would be the end of it. I mean, I told them no, what else could they do? But if there's one thing I've learned through this whole mess, it's that drama has a way of sticking around, even when you think it's over. And yeah, things went from awkward to downright ugly pretty fast. A couple of days later, I was sitting in my living room trying to get back to my usual routine when my phone rang. It was my mom. Now, I love my mom, but I already knew what this call was going to be about. Sure enough, she didn't waste any time. "Brian, I just talked to Jane," she said, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice before she even got to the point. "She told me everything, and I just don't understand why you won't help them. They're in a really tough spot, and you're their brother." I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I explained, again, that it wasn't about not wanting to help. I offered to help Jane and Alex find a rental. I offered to give them money for a deposit. But moving into my house for almost a year, rent-free, just wasn't something I could do. "Mom, I've got my own life here," I said. "It's not about space. It's about my peace of mind. I worked hard for this place, and I need my privacy. Having 4 extra people here, especially for 10 months, just isn't something I'm comfortable with." But my mom wasn't having it. She started going on about how family helps family, how I didn't know what it was like to be in their shoes, and how I was being selfish by turning them away. It was like everything I said went in one ear and out the other. "I know you worked hard, Brian, but you're in a position to help them, and they really need it," she said. "You're not struggling like they are. What's a few months of discomfort compared to helping your sister get back on her feet?" I was trying to stay calm, but inside I was getting frustrated. I felt like she wasn't listening to anything I was saying. It wasn't about a few months of discomfort. It was about the fact that Jane and Alex had made bad decisions and expected me to clean up the mess. I wasn't responsible for their choices. "I've already offered to help in other ways," I reminded her. "I'm not turning my back on them. I'm just not letting them move in. That's my boundary." But my mom wasn't satisfied. She sighed, and I could hear the guilt in her voice. "I just thought you'd be more understanding. They've always been there for you, Brian." I didn't argue. I knew there was no point. She wasn't going to see my side, no matter how many times I explained it. So I just told her I'd think about it, hung up the phone, and tried to shake off the guilt. But the guilt didn't go away because the next day, my dad called. Now, my dad isn't the kind of guy who guilt trips you. He's more of a straight shooter. When he's mad, you hear about it, and this time was no different. "Brian, I don't know what's going on with you and Jane," he said, his voice low and serious. "But you're really screwing this up." I tried to explain my side again, but he wasn't interested in hearing it. He went off about how Jane has always been the one willing to take risks, how she's always lived her life to the fullest, while I've played it safe. He talked about how I was being selfish for not helping them out when they needed it the most. "Jane's out there trying to make something of her life, and you're sitting in that house, comfortable, refusing to lift a finger," he said, his voice growing more intense. "You've always had it easy. Now it's time for you to step up and be a decent brother." That stung. I've never thought of myself as someone who had it easy. I've worked hard for everything I have, and hearing my dad dismiss all of that as if it didn't matter was like a punch to the gut. "Dad, this isn't about being adventurous or not," I said, trying to stay calm. "They made bad choices, and now they want me to fix it. It's not fair to put that on me." But he wasn't hearing it. He kept going on about how I needed to help, how family is everything, and how I was failing as a brother. It felt like he'd taken everything Jane had said and decided to run with it, making me out to be the bad guy in this whole situation. "I've worked hard for this house," I said. my voice a little sharper now. I'm not going to let them move in and turn my life upside down. I've already offered other ways to help, and they didn't want it. That's not on me. He didn't like that answer, but after a few more minutes of back and forth, he hung up, clearly disappointed. I felt like crap. I had always been the responsible one in the family, the one who kept things steady, and now it felt like none of that mattered. Jane had managed to turn everyone against me, and I was the one being painted as the villain. Then the final blow came a few hours later. I got a message from one of our mutual friends, Mike. He's a good guy, but also close to Jane, so I knew he'd heard her side of the story. "Hey, man, what's going on with you and Jane?" he asked. "She says you're not letting her family stay with you, even though they're struggling. Is that true?" I explained everything to him. How I'd offered to help find them a rental, how I even offered to give them money for a deposit, but they wanted to move in for 10 months rent-free, and I just couldn't do it. I laid it all out, hoping he'd understand. He listened, but then he hit me with, "Yeah, but it's family, dude. Couldn't you just let them stay for a little while? You've got the space." And that's when I knew I was fighting an uphill battle. No matter how many times I explained myself, no matter how reasonable my argument was, people kept acting like it was no big deal for me to let a whole family move in for almost a year. Like my house wasn't even mine anymore. It was just a place they thought I should offer up because we shared blood. That night, Jane herself texted me. It wasn't a long message, but it hit hard. "I can't believe you turned your back on us. We really needed you." I stared at the screen, torn between feeling guilty and standing my ground. Part of me wondered if I could have handled things differently. Maybe I should have been softer in my response. Maybe I could have been more understanding. But the other part of me knew that if I gave in, I'd just be enabling them to keep making reckless decisions without ever facing the consequences. I didn't respond. I knew there was nothing I could say to make things right, not without giving in to their demands, and I wasn't going to do that. But the guilt was there, gnawing at me, making me second-guess everything. Still, I knew deep down that I wasn't in the wrong. I had set a boundary, and it wasn't my fault if Jane and Alex didn't like it. But of course, this was far from over. Jane wasn't done yet. I wish I could tell you that things cooled down after that text from Jane. I really hoped that maybe, just maybe, she'd let it go, or that my family would back off and stop pushing me into something I clearly wasn't comfortable with. But if you've been following along, you already know that's not how this played out. The drama was far from over. A few days passed, and I kept my head down, trying to focus on my life. I figured if I ignored the situation for long enough, people would cool off, and maybe we could all just move on. I was wrong. So wrong. One morning, I woke up to find my phone blowing up with notifications. Apparently, Jane had taken things public, very public. She posted this long rant on Facebook, tagging a bunch of family members and mutual friends, calling me out for not helping her when they were in desperate need. The post was a mess. She went on about how I had a big, comfortable house all to myself and how, despite having the ability to help, I turned my back on my family. She made it sound like they were one step away from living on the streets, homeless and abandoned, and of course, people ate it up. I scrolled through the comments, feeling my stomach drop. People were posting things like, "I can't believe your brother wouldn't help you," and "Family is everything, what's wrong with him?" Some people I hadn't talked to in years were jumping in, making me sound like the cold-hearted villain in this whole thing. Even worse, my extended family got involved. A couple of my aunts and uncles were in the comments, shaking their heads and basically calling me selfish without outright saying it. My cousins, some of whom I barely even know, were sharing the post, adding their own commentary about how family is supposed to help each other in times of need. It felt like the world had turned on me, and all I could think was how unfair it was that Jane had twisted the story so much. I was sitting in my living room, feeling the weight of all this judgment and anger coming down on me, and I didn't know what to do. Now, I'm not the kind of person who likes to air dirty laundry online. I hate drama, especially public drama. But after seeing the way people were talking about me, people who didn't even know the full story, I knew I couldn't just sit there and let Jane's version of events become the only one people heard. I did something I never thought I'd do. I wrote my own post. It wasn't easy. I had to take a deep breath before I hit post, but I was fed up with being painted as the villain in all of this. I explained everything from my perspective. How Jane and Alex sold their house without a plan. How they blew through their money in just a few months and then came to me asking to live rent-free in my house for almost a year. How I had offered to help them find a rental and even offered money to help them get back on their feet, but they turned that down because they wanted everything. I didn't make it a sob story, but I was honest. I laid out my boundaries, explaining why it wasn't fair to expect me to open up my home when they made reckless choices. I wanted people to understand that it wasn't about me being heartless. It was about me protecting my own life, my own space, and my peace of mind. I hit post and braced myself for the fallout. It didn't take long. The comments came pouring in, and it was a mix of reactions. Some people supported me, saying I had every right to set boundaries and that Jane and Alex were being unreasonable. Others still sided with Jane, saying I should have just sucked it up for the sake of family. One of my cousins even messaged me privately, calling me selfish and saying I didn't understand the importance of family. It was exhausting. It felt like no matter how many times I explained my side, there were still people who just wouldn't listen. They wanted to believe Jane's story because it fit their narrative of what family should be like. Unconditional, no boundaries, no questions asked. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, Jane sent me a long, angry message. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone," she wrote. "I can't believe you'd stoop so low to make me look like the bad guy. We needed you, and you turned your back on us. You've always been selfish, and now the whole family knows it." I stared at the message, my hands shaking with anger. She was the one who had made this public. She was the one who had twisted the story to make herself look like the victim, and now she was blaming me for defending myself. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was no point in arguing with her anymore. She wasn't going to see my side, and I was done trying to make her. After that, things went quiet for a while. Jane blocked me on Facebook, and my parents stopped calling. The whole family seemed to be in this weird standoff, waiting for someone to make the next move. But I wasn't going to be the one to reach out. I had drawn my line in the sand, and I wasn't backing down no matter how much they tried to guilt me into it. And then came the final blow. My dad called me again, and this time, he wasn't yelling. His voice was quiet, almost sad. "Brian," he said, "I don't know what's happened to you. I don't understand why you can't just help your sister. It's not too late to make things right." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Dad, I've already told you I'm not going to let them move in. I offered to help in other ways, but they don't want that. They want me to give up my house for almost a year, and I'm not doing it. I worked hard for this place, and I have every right to say no." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, finally, my dad sighed. "I just hope you know what you're doing, Brian," he said. "I hope you don't regret this." And then he hung up. That was it. No more calls, no more messages. Jane was still blocked, and my parents seemed to be done trying to convince me. It felt like the whole family was fractured, and I wasn't sure if things would ever go back to the way they were. But here's the thing. As much as it sucked to have my family mad at me, as much as it hurt to be painted as the villain, I knew I had done the right thing. I had set a boundary, and I had stuck to it. And that, to me, was worth more than giving in just to keep the peace. In the end, I realized something important. Family is important, yes, but so is my own well-being, so is my peace of mind. And if standing up for myself meant that I had to deal with some fallout, so be it. I'm not going to lie, it still hurts. It hurts that my family doesn't understand my side, and it hurts that things have changed so much between us. But I know deep down that I made the right call. And maybe, one day, Jane will realize that too. But until then, I'm moving on. No more guilt. No more drama. Just me, in my house, living my life the way I want to. Story 2. Mom wants me to have his child by marrying my eerie stepbrother. Well, because it will seem crazy otherwise, I suppose I should start with some backstory. My 29-year-old stepbrother, Owen, 42M, has been my source of constant misery ever since our parents' marriage. It seems as though the moment my mom married his dad, my life became a chaotic nightmare. Owen was 17 at the time. and I was just 4. You would think that at that age, he wouldn't mind having a small child about, but nope, that guy had my best interests at heart from the beginning. Both of our parents lost their first husbands. I don't really remember my dad because he passed away when I was a baby. After that, my mom got married again. Owen, S mother died before his father was married. Mom. It seemed like we were forced together in a blended family that would never work out. Not in a millennium. We went to the U.S. shortly after their wedding since my mom's previous marriage to my dad had granted her U.S. citizenship. It was this significant alteration. New family, new nation. And to crown it all, Owen is a new bully in town. I sensed a problem as soon as I moved inside their home. Owen detested me, and I could see he detested me deeply. He would constantly imprison me in strange areas. One occasion, he pushed me into the guest bathroom, shut the door from the outside, and simply abandoned me there. I felt like I was in there for hours. Not even a single person sought me out. When I eventually told my mother that I had left, she dismissed it with a smile. "He's only playing with you," she would remark all the time. "Be less theatrical." However, it didn't end there. Owen made it his goal to give me nightmares on a daily basis. He would take my lunchbox and toss it in the garbage if he were the one taking me to school. He would urge me to spend hours outside after locking me out of the house. He wouldn't give a damn when I would sit there weeping. My mother never intervened or told him to stop it. She saw Owen as this perfect child who was incapable of doing anything wrong. To be honest, I believe she was more fond of him than she was of me. Although she never acknowledged it, it was clear. It's not like my mother was a classic abusive parent. She didn't always yell at me or slap me, but she didn't seem to care. She was so preoccupied with making sure Owen was happy and starting a new family to even realize what was happening. And as a result, Owen avoided punishment for the crime. He even attempted to harm my animals. Bella, my elderly cat, is still with me to this day. She is currently about 22 years old. He would attempt to hit her with his vehicle. The number of times I had to get her out of the roadway before Owen could unintentionally hit her is beyond me. I am certain he was acting purposefully, but my mother never gave me credit for it. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she would say. "He is an animal lover." Yes, if you interpret love as wanting to murder them. Nor did Owen's actions end with the bullying. Things became incredibly eerie as I grew older. He possessed an unusually long key that allowed him to open the bathroom door from the outside. As in, the doorknob had this hole in it. Therefore, you could insert a lengthy object inside to unlock it if it became locked from the inside. Owen deduced that, and he took advantage of it to bug me when I was taking a shower. When I would yell for him to go, he would just chuckle. He would pretend it was nothing at all. As though he was only playing around. I once found my underpants was missing from the bathroom after getting out of the shower. I was certain it was him. Who else may it be? When I challenged him, all he did was laugh in my face. Naturally, when I informed my mother, she urged me to stop creating trouble and said I was just crazy and making things up. She was determined to never hear negative things about Owen. It wasn't him, it was me. Then things escalated further. When I was 14, Owen was standing over my bed when I woke up in the middle of the night. I was partly asleep, so at first I had no idea what was occurring. However, I later noticed it. If you understand what I mean, he was looking after himself. My mom and stepdad ran into the room when I yelled. But well, what do you know? They didn't accept my story. By the time they arrived, Owen had already escaped, so I was the one in danger. Mom said that I had to have done something to entice him. Yes, I was 14 and he was 27, but I still felt responsible for this. I realized then that I could not continue to live in that house. I needed to go. There was nowhere for me to go. However, my considerably elder half-brother Alex sprang to mind. He is from the first marriage of my biological father. Though we didn't hang out all that often, I knew he was a wonderful man, so I gave him a call and told him everything. I had no idea what to do, and I was afraid. Alex made no hesitation at all. He promised to come fetch me and instructed me to gather my belongings. The moment Alex confronted my mother about what Owen had been up to, she was indifferent. She just said that if Alex wanted to, he could have me, as long as she was free from my presence. And that's precisely what took place. Alex and his wife Katie became my legal guardians when I moved in with them. I didn't even bother saying farewell to my mother. The fact that I had left and that I no longer wanted to be there didn't matter to her. I felt safe for the first time in a long time. I was taken in by Alex and Katie, who also made sure I had all I needed to graduate high school. Owen never again had to worry about snooping around my room or locking me in restrooms. I felt as though a tremendous burden had been removed from my shoulders. I completed my bachelor's and master's degrees while still living with them, and I currently work as a nurse practitioner. While I'm accumulating money to buy a place of my own, I continue to live with them. Interesting how, after all these years, my mom now wants to be a part of my life again, even though she didn't care about me for years. It's not because she misses me, I assure you. She's asking for something from me, that's why. Furthermore, her request is just absurd. I'll reserve that section for later, though. Okay, so things started to seem normal again once I moved in with Alex and Katie. Or as normal as possible in light of everything that transpired involving Owen and my mother. Let me tell you, the first time I felt like I could truly breathe was when I left their house when I was 16 years old. No more of Owen's strange looks. I want my mother to stop walking in on me and treating me like garbage. I was treated like family by Alex and Katie. To be honest, they were the finest thing that I have ever experienced. Alex was always this cool-headed person who would listen to you and genuinely take an interest in what you had to say. Katie was equally incredible. She had the strength and resilience of a supermom. I felt protected for the first time in a long time since they made sure I had all I needed. I didn't have to worry about what Owen might do next all the time or had to sleep with one eye open. I could just live fearlessly. However, school was difficult at first. It was a nightmare having to move to a new high school in the middle of my junior year. Everyone else seemed to have found their niche, and I felt like the strange newcomer who didn't belong anyplace. In addition, I was carrying so much emotional baggage from all of the events that I was genuinely unsure of how to interact with others. I just worked hard, kept my head down, and got by each day. I had no intention of making pals. All I wanted was to graduate from high school and move on. Katie and Alex sensed that I wasn't feeling well. I mean, I wasn't exactly prospering, but I also wasn't failing. They advised me to visit a therapist, although at first I was reluctant to do so. I used to believe that counseling was just for those far worse off than myself. Ultimately, though, I decided to go since I reasoned that it couldn't be harmful. At first, therapy seemed strange. I wasn't used to discussing my emotions, and I didn't want to relive the entire ordeal with Owen and my mother. However, Dr. Harris, the therapist, was really patient with me. After a few sessions, I began to open up to her since she never pushed too hard. It was more helpful than I had anticipated. I felt less like I was dragging around this enormous dark secret after talking about what had happened. I felt less alone in it, even if everything was still messed up. At this time, things were pretty much non-existent with my mom. To be honest, I was comfortable with her not checking in on me, not calling, and not texting. After what she'd done, or not done, I didn't want to hear from her. I didn't need her pulling me down as I was trying to start over in my life. Once again, it was a comfort to hear the same radio quiet about Owen. Here, the problem, though. I was feeling better, but I couldn't get rid of the sensation that it wasn't finished. Do you get that sensation in your gut that something is about to bite you in the rear? Yes, that is what I experienced. I was aware that my mother and Owen would return. They reminded me of a storm building in the distance, and I sensed that danger would eventually find its way back to them. I attempted to concentrate on my studies and future plans in the interim. My mom never gave a damn about my going to college, but Alex and Katie were really supportive. They assisted me with everything: applications, financial aid, etc. After receiving acceptances from a few schools, I ultimately made the decision to remain in the area in order to live with Alex and Katie while attending classes. It just made sense. I wasn't prepared to live alone just yet, not after everything. They also didn't charge me rent, which saved my life because education is ridiculously costly. Things were rather tranquil throughout those years in college. I continued to see my therapist intermittently in order to continue processing things. Sometimes I would have flashbacks, remembering things like Owen being in my room that night, or my mother telling me that I was the one who needed to change, not him. But I was moving forward for the most part. I had my studies front and center, spending time with Alex and Katie's children, who I thought of as tiny siblings, and attempting to create a future apart from my dysfunctional family. Then my mother texted me out of the blue. After years of not hearing from her, all of a sudden she's gone. I really do miss you. How are you doing? It was really phony. I felt ill from it. Even though I could feel the manipulation via the screen, I made an effort to seem civil. Despite my knowledge that there was no way, this was only a cordial check-in. I had a strong feeling that she was craving something, and I was correct. Following a few. How are we misusing each other? She revealed her true motivation for messaging. She launched into a discussion regarding Owen's financial difficulties. It seems that he never completed the degrees he began, and now he was drowning in college debt, working at my stepdad's used car business. She told me over and over again how difficult it was for him and how unfair it was that I had such a successful profession while Owen was unable to go forward. By now, I knew exactly what was going to happen, so I was already rolling my eyes. As expected, she requested me to settle his school loans at last. Similar to what? She genuinely believed that I would throw away my hard-earned money to help the man who had essentially destroyed my childhood. I didn't even say anything. I simply decided I was done and shut off my phone. I quote, am done with her. With Owen, I'm done. Everything is finished. Alex was furious when I informed him and Katie what had occurred. Usually the one to remain cool, but I've never seen him look so furious. I followed his advice and blocked Owen, my mother, and everyone else who may try to get in touch with me. I was not going to put up with their antics any longer. I was determined not to allow them to draw me back into their mess, since I had put in too much effort to repair my life. Naturally, though, my mother would not take it lying down. She had a knack for finding ways to irritate me, and when she didn't get her way, she chose to step it up. She and Owen arrived at Alex's place the next day. Yes, they really did come to the house with the intention of intimidating me into handing them money. That was my alone time at home. I observed Alex and Katie arrive into the driveway when the kids were in school and they were at work. My heart fell. I sensed that this would not end well. And there I was going about my business by myself at Alex's home. I saw my mother and Owen coming into the driveway the next thing I know. When my stomach fell, to be really honest, my first reaction was, why now? I was clueless as to how they even had Alex's address, yet here they were, behaving as like they could simply come there and I would grant their wishes without any problems. When they knocked on my door, I didn't even bother responding since I already knew how this was going to end. My mother had this ability to go from being kind and caring to being very scary in an instant. Owen as well. After everything he'd done to me, I wasn't even going to let him the joy of seeing me. I could not possibly allow him to enter the house. After a few minutes of knocking, they began to shout at me when I didn't respond. Initially, my mother was there. You are due to us. Do you really believe you can disregard us in this way? You were reared by us. We are due for everything that we accomplished. She would not stop talking about how it was my job to pay off Owen's school debt because I had a legitimate job and he was having financial difficulties. Her statement that your poor brother deserves a chance struck a chord with me. We won't leave until you give us what we deserve because you're being egotistical. Merited what they were due. It was astounding to me that she genuinely believed they were undeserving of my attention, particularly considering the years of misery I endured while residing with them. It was an unrealistic entitlement. Owen, quote, S voice then reached my ears, and wow, the things he was saying were harsh. You occupy unnecessary space. You ought to have been kicked out years ago. You have only ever been a burden. He was pacing the home in an attempt to locate a door or window that he might smash through. I could hear him shouting any slur he could think of, knocking on the windows and rattling the doorknobs. It seemed as though he was defying me to go outdoors in an attempt to weaken me so that I would cave. Grabbing my phone, I made a call to Alex. Not that I had to explain much, he was aware of the situation. My mother and Owen arrived at the house as soon as I stated it. He instructed me to stay inside, lock all the doors, and never open. He promised to arrive as quickly as he could, saying he was on his way. Never in my life have I been more appreciative of Alex. He has always supported me, and today was no exception. I followed Alex's advice and made sure all the locks were tight, even though I thought everything was already locked. The problem is, Alex's home isn't your typical home. I wasn't too concerned about Owen really getting in because Dad had security bars on all the windows and doors due to some break-ins that had occurred in the area a few years earlier, but it didn't make it any less horrifying. I heard glass breaking as Owen began to hammer harder on one of the windows next to the kitchen dot. With my pulse racing, all I could think was, what if he does break in? I didn't want to see him in person once again. Not after everything. All I could do was try not to freak out as the memories of what he had done to me when I was younger came flooding back. My mother continued to shout at me from the front porch, alternating between pleading and threatening Dot. She said, "We're family," one moment. "You must assist us." Then she said, "I'll make sure you regret it if you don't open this door." Traditional manipulation. I was no longer even surprised by it. Owen must have lost patience since he returned to the front entrance after giving up on the windows. I heard him attempting to take it down. He was yelling at me in a really offensive way, things that make you feel useless. It was not your place to be born. With each kick, it seemed as though the door was trembling. However, I knew Alex's home was constructed like a stronghold. There was no turning back that door, no matter how much Owen attempted to dissect it. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard a voice outside that I knew Alex was here now. From where I was hiding in one of the bedrooms, I could not see much, but I could hear the yelling becoming louder. It was not going to happen to Alex. He began to shout at Owen and my mother, demanding them to get off his land immediately. Alex has never sounded so irrational to me. He's usually quite composed, but this wasn't him. Like me, he was done with them. Many people were shouting. Subsequently, I heard my mother begin to cry. It was her usual phony sob, the one she would never stop using to control someone. She went on and on about how I was breaking up the family and prioritizing money above family. She was trying very hard to get Alex to side with her, but Alex wasn't buying it. He informed her up front that he was going to call the police if she and Owen didn't leave. I sneaked a sneaky peek out the bedroom window, and I must admit it was sort of satisfying. Owen and my mother looked scared. I believe they realized they had gone too far this time, and now they faced someone who would not put up with their bullying of me. After a few more minutes of threats and ranting, Alex held his ground, and eventually my mom and Owen gave up. Like cowards, they got into their car and drove off. Even though I knew they were exceeding the speed limit, I didn't care at that moment. All I wanted was for them to depart. A few minutes later, Alex came inside, and the moment I saw him, I started crying. After the adrenaline wears off, all the worry and anxiety I'd been suppressing suddenly burst forth. Alex gave me a hug and apologized profusely for everything that had transpired, even though he had nothing to do with it. He assured me he would never allow them to cause me any more pain, and I genuinely believed him for the first time in a very long time. Following that, Katie hurried from work to answer a call from Alex. She was just as mad as Alex, and to be honest, I was thinking she was going to find my mother and Owen on her own and take care of them. However, Alex soothed her and advised us to concentrate on obtaining a restraining order against them. Even though I wasn't sure whether it would help, I was ready to do anything to keep them away at that point. The days that followed were stressful. Owen and my mother never returned to the home, but my mother began phoning me from a variety of numbers, leaving voicemails that in a matter of minutes ranged from an apology to a warning to tears. I changed my number in the end because I was so tired and needed some quiet. Katie and Alex were incredible during the entire ordeal. They assisted me in making contact with an attorney and initiating the restraining order procedure. We even discussed filing charges against Owen for his childhood abuse of me. To be honest, though, I wasn't sure whether I would be able to endure everything again. Nevertheless, it was all the difference in the world knowing that Alex and Katie were there to defend me. But I knew that this was not the end, not by a long stretch. I thus assumed that after the entire altercation at Alex's place, things would subside. Perhaps at last my mother and Owen would understand and leave me alone. Yes, I was mistaken. Very incorrect. First came the phone calls. Despite my efforts to block her number, my mother constantly managed to make calls from other numbers. Her voicemails would be lengthy and meandering, alternating between sobbing and attempting to put me under pressure. She would say things like, "You're destroying this family," or "How can you be so heartless to your own mother?" She seemed to be experiencing every feeling imaginable in an attempt to determine which would be most effective. Of course, I didn't reply to any of it. I had no intention of falling back into her drama. However, things became more bizarre. My supervisor once summoned me into her office while I was at work. When I first stepped in, I assumed I was in trouble or something, but she had this worried expression on her face. "I think you need to see this," she continued, passing me a piece of paper. It was a letter from my mother explaining how she was able to get something to work. I quote, "am still not sure." However, the letter was, to put it mildly, unnerving. She began by expressing her need for a reunion as mother and daughter and how much she missed me. However, things became spooky after that. She launched into a conversation about Owen, telling me how much he loves me and how much he's been thinking of me. She even said that Owen and I had been discussing his possible marriage. Right there in my boss's office, I almost passed out. I can't decide which was worse. Her belief that Owen and I should be together, or the fact that she accepted this as normal. As in, what the hell? She was pushing this deranged notion that everything would be all right if I simply moved back in with them and forgave Owen. She believed that it was up to me to put things right, as though I was at blame for every miscommunication that had occurred between us. It was quite chaotic. As I read it, I was trembling. My supervisor inquired about my well-being, having prior knowledge of my family problems, at least the more visible ones. I was first unable to respond at all. She glanced over the letter that I had just given her. With each syllable, her eyes grew wider. "You must seek a restraining order," she continued, setting down the letter. "This might be harmful." Even though I knew she was correct, I still felt stuck. It felt like I had been waging this war for a very long time, and nothing was making it go away. My mother refused to give up until she achieved her goals, or until a significant event occurred. I didn't want to consider the possibility of it at all. I went directly to Alex after work and showed him the letter. He was enraged. Without delay, he contacted our attorney and intensified his efforts to obtain the restraining order. Things seemed to be moving quickly and more intensely. My mother was no longer merely a bother. This was actual harassment. The worst aspect, too, it was like putting gasoline on a fire, the way she was pulling Owen back into the picture. While the lawyer assisted us with filing the necessary paperwork, I made an effort to maintain my usual routine. However, my mother would always find a new method to contact me just when I thought it was finished. I received a call one day from a number I was unfamiliar with. I was wary of any unfamiliar number at this time, but for some reason I answered it. I regret doing so. My aunt was there. That's what she said, anyhow. My mom's side of the family had aunts, but I had no idea. It seems that she was lying when she said she had no relatives, as she had always done. This aunt went on a long tirade about how important family is, how I should make up with my mom, and how neglecting her was selfish on my part. She would not stop talking about how much my mother has given up for me and how it is now my turn to return the favor. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. The guilt trip never stopped. She threatened to make it seem as though I was somehow to blame for my mom's mental health issues if I didn't step up, saying that I was the reason my mom was in a difficult financial and emotional situation. I had to end the call. It was more than I could handle. I texted Alex to let him know what had transpired after that and blocked the phone. He assured me that this was simply my mom's mind trickery and that I shouldn't worry. It still shook me, though. I felt as though strangers were invading my entire existence, and I had no idea who else my mother might bring into this mess. My mother escalated things a bit a few days later. She began blogging about me on the internet. Initially, it was simply her acting like the victim, telling everyone how I had abandoned her and how she was the one who was suffering as a result of my harshness. But then she went too far. She began accusing me of being Owen's issue. In fact, she claimed in one of her articles that ever since we were adolescents, I had been attempting to woo him. She built this repulsive picture of me as the one who started all the problems in our family, claiming that I had been infatuated with Owen for years and that I was just envious of him. She even went so far as to claim that I turned my stepdad on Owen in an attempt to destroy her marriage. I felt ill to my stomach knowing that it was all falsehoods. Even worse, a number of her acquaintances and even relatives began to support her, claiming that they had observed my behavior around Owen and that it was obvious that I was working toward a personal grudge. These are folks I have never even met. I had the impression that I was under constant attack and that there was nothing I could do to stop it. I was warned not to interact by Alex. He said that my mother's desire to pick fights online was just what she desired. Her intention was to involve me in her play, paint me as the villain, and portray herself as the helpless victim. Even if he was correct, ignoring it didn't become any simpler. I couldn't help but feel as like I was watching over my shoulder all the time, wondering what might come next. Even though the lawyer was attempting to expedite the restraining order, I didn't feel secure. It seemed like my mother would stop at nothing to regain authority over my life. Growing up, she had already stolen so much from me: my youth, my feeling of security, and my faith in her as a mother. She was now attempting to steal my mental tranquility as well. However, I refused to let her prevail. Not at this moment. I had no clue how far my mother would go, but I knew there was still a long way to go. But I felt like I had a shot, at last, with Alex and Katie at my side. I had grown out of my fear of little animals. I was done allowing her to dictate to me. And I was determined to keep going, regardless of how many letters, calls, or internet posts she made. She was unable to stop me, right now. I had assumed that following my mom's ominous emails and social media tirades, things would eventually calm down. I assumed she'd ran out of avenues to attack me. If I've discovered anything, though, it's that my mother and Owen are far more dysfunctional than I ever gave them credit for. And they did, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse. I get a call from Alex when I'm at work a few weeks after the entire aunt phone call and my mom's internet slander campaign. Since Alex seldom phones me during the day unless it's something serious, I recall thinking it was strange. Thus, I respond. Additionally, there's a strange quality to his voice, as if he's trying not to scare me while yet making a point. You should sit down for this, he advises. My pulse quickens because really, what now? With my mom's crazy, I thought we'd reached our lowest point, but it turns out we weren't even close. I hear from Alex that Owen was taken into custody. And not just for a trifle either. His kidnapping led to his arrest. Yes, what you just read is true. He abducted a person. I was at a loss for words. I sat there attempting to digest the words with the phone pressed to my ear, thoughtless as always, but kidnapping. It's on a whole other level. Alex informed me that Owen had abducted the 2-year-old daughter of his cousin. He had immediately taken her from her daycare. Owen purportedly went to take up the little child without authorization, saying he was supporting the family. He claimed to be her uncle, so the daycare allowed him to take her. It took a few hours for him to take her to recognize that something was very wrong. And Owen was already driving off with her when the police were summoned. It's scary to even consider what he was going to do with her. I have no idea. Thank heavens the police located them quickly. According to Alex, they apprehended him in a parking lot at an unidentified retail establishment. Thank God the little child was not hurt, but Owen was taken into custody right away. He made no attempt to resist it. I felt horrible because he just sat there, seemingly unfazed, while the cops dragged him away. I always suspected Owen was troubled, but there was something different about this. I was thinking about that poor young child all the time. She could have suffered severe injuries, or much worse. It was astonishing how quickly they located her. Who the heck kidnaps members of their own family? I'm not even interested in learning what Owen's thoughts were. However, it just goes to show how lost he has become that he even believed this was acceptable. I hung up on Alex, and I was unable to focus on anything. All I could think about was how, when I was younger, I had almost been his target. What would he have done to me if he could have done this now? That was back then? If I hadn't left at the time I did? I felt as though everything from my past had returned, and I was once again in the terrible place I had battled so valiantly to leave behind. Alex informed me of developments about the case. It seemed sense that the family felt incensed. I'd hardly even met my mom's side of the family, and they were freaking out. And Owen's father was utterly shocked. Although Alex had heard that Owen had been spinning for some time, nobody had anticipated that he would do something like this. Not even his father, who had always stood up for him, could justify this. But the most absurd aspect: Mom. My mother had the audacity to claim that everything was a misunderstanding. She said that the cops had overreacted and that Owen was only attempting to assist everyone who would listen. She made an attempt to minimize the situation, acting as though the kidnapping of a child wasn't a significant issue. She continued to encourage him, acting as though he was impervious to harm. Even after all, I lost it, as Alex informed me. I was done being furious, although I was angry before. I'm done with her. With Owen, I'm done. Everything is finished. It was astounding to me that she would support him following his actions. She seems to have lost all sense of reality. I sat down with Alex and Katie the next day, and we had a lengthy conversation about what to do next. At last, the restraining order was being implemented, and my attorney was assisting me in arranging for my mother and Owen to be kept as far away from me as feasible. However, there remained the matter of my mother's internet diatribes and the falsehoods she disseminated about me. I couldn't just stand by and let her ruin my reputation, but I also didn't want to argue with her in public. Alex mentioned something at that point, and I hadn't even considered filing a fraud complaint against her. We could now take my mom to court since we had proof that she had been fabricating receipts and paperwork for years in order to obtain money from my dad's trust. Both Alex and the attorney agreed, stating that it was time to stop playing defense and start attacking. At first, I wasn't certain. Going after my own mother in court felt like such a big step, you know? However, the more I considered it, the more I saw how much she had already stolen from me. My trust, my safety, my childhood. All of it had been taken from me by her and Owen. Why shouldn't I defend myself? Thus, we carried it out. Now that the fraud case was formally underway, I at last felt like I was in charge of the circumstances. Even if it wouldn't be simple, at least I wouldn't be waiting for the next horrible event to occur. After that, everything happened really swiftly. My mother's falsehoods were beginning to come to light as Owen's trial for the kidnapping got underway. She was beginning to be recognized for the true person she was. Someone who, regardless of Owen's wrongdoing, would stop at nothing to keep him safe. She persisted in promoting the story of the miscommunication, but nobody was believing it anymore. Even a few of the relatives who had supported her began to turn against her. Witnessing everything around them come apart was an odd sensation. I felt a little relieved, as if justice was at last being done. However, a different part of me was just worn out. I was forced to continue this conflict with my own family even though I didn't want to. The only way I could move on and protect myself was to do this. It felt like I could breathe again when the restraining order was eventually approved. Owen was incarcerated. I felt like I had a real chance to start over for the first time in years as my mom's fraud case was getting began. It had not ended yet, not by much, but at least I was headed in the right direction. And that's the current state of affairs. I'm still processing all of the legal matters and coping with the psychological aftermath. However, I'm no longer afraid. I'm not the defenseless little child who allowed my mother and Owen to rule her life. I've gained strength, and regardless of anything they hurl at me thereafter, I'm prepared. Story 3. After they insisted that we give up our home for my sister-in-law who is unemployed and her family, my husband eventually severed his relationship with his poisonous mother and sister. Okay, so let me begin by stating that Brian, my husband, was always the best child. The one that the family essentially centers on, you know. Growing up, his mother, Karen, treated him as though he were the sun, moon, and stars, due to his dad's constant work schedule, which meant that Brian was always with his mother. They were very close. They had a really close relationship. And to be honest, when I first saw it, it seemed a bit too near. At first, though, I didn't give it any thought. I mean, parents and sons being close is just normal, right? However, as I got to know them more, I saw that Karen wasn't only partial to Brian. She adored him. In the meantime, Amanda, his sister, consistently received the short end of the stick. I could tell that growing up in Brian's shadow had left Amanda feeling rather resentful, and Karen hardly gave her any attention. Brian, nonetheless, made an effort to be a nice big brother to her. That is the kind of excellent heart he has. In any case, things quickly became strange with Karen and Amanda once Brian and I began dating. I initially believed I was being overly suspicious. Then things began to happen, though, and I realized I wasn't dreaming. For instance, while Brian and I were living together, his relatives would frequently stop by without warning. Family visits are fine with me now, but at least let us know. Do you know? That wasn't their style, apparently. I was sound sleeping in bed with Brian one morning when Amanda suddenly walked in as if it were nothing out of the ordinary. No knock, no nothing, just jumps right in. She begins talking to Brian as if it were no big issue as I'm laying in bed, half-naked. I quote, I'm not even sure whether she was aware of my underpants or gave a damn. She pretended that this was perfectly typical behavior, which made me feel ashamed. Who does that? I initially believed that I simply didn't understand this and that it may be some strange sibling thing. However, after a few more instances, I decided that enough was enough. I drew Brian away and informed him that I didn't enjoy his sister simply walking into our bedroom whenever she wanted. Come on, being rude is just common sense. A grown adult shouldn't need to hear that explanation from me. In order to prevent Amanda from storming in, Brian and I agreed to lock the door. You would assume that would take care of the issue, but it doesn't. When Amanda attempted to enter again the very following morning and was unable, she completely lost it. She was screaming for Brian to allow her in, banging on the door and jiggling the handle. There I lay. Like, what on earth is going on at this moment? Being the good-hearted person that he is, Brian unlocked the door to speak with her. But before he could say anything, she began to insist on knowing why the door had been locked. She's calling me a skank and pointing at me. I'm not kidding. She was upset, accusing me of attempting to get in between them and the reason he closed the door. I just sat there in a daze. For example, where on earth did it originate? When someone wants solitude in their own room, who immediately labels them a skank? Amanda refused to listen to Brian's attempts to soothe her. She insisted that the lock wasn't essential and that siblings shouldn't keep secrets from one another. Brian explained to her that it was only about privacy and not about hiding secrets, particularly while we're asleep, you know. She refused to listen, though. She was certain that I was causing friction between them and that I was the issue. She told me so without hesitation. Amanda's life was never the same after that. Every time we were in the same room, I could sense that she had my best interests at heart. Amanda would support Brian and tell him that he needed someone who knew him better if we couldn't agree on anything, even something as trivial as what movie to watch. She would say that directly in front of me, like, it was really unpleasant. There were also the questions. The questions, my God. Amanda would ask me all these nasty things about my previous relationships while Brian wasn't present. Why did your ex dump you? She would ask. He probably believed you were unworthy of him. It was really passive-aggressive. She even went so far as to remark that you are not nearly as attractive as Brian's previous girlfriend. Who says that, like? I initially made an effort to ignore it. I didn't want to upset Brian's family anymore, and I reasoned that if I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting, perhaps she would stop. But it was difficult to keep silent the more she pressed and prodded. She questioned me again one day why my last relationship failed, and I lost my temper. She was quiet for a long after I informed her that I preferred my ex's family over Brian's, since they didn't have a nosy sister who was always trying to make issues. It was nice to put her in her place for once, even though I'm not the kind who enjoy conflict. To be honest, though, Karen was just as annoying as Amanda. Brian pretended that I didn't exist when we initially started dating. She refused to even glance at me at family get-togethers or dinners. She ignored me entirely when I tried to strike up a conversation. It was really embarrassing, and I was unable to reach her no matter what I tried. Then things changed when Karen saw that Brian and I were sincere about one another. She began to treat me as though I posed a threat rather than ignoring me. She obviously didn't like the thought of her son dating someone else. She behaved like I was a privileged child just because my parents sent me to a private school, and she made nasty remarks about how I must have had it easy. Karen even told Brian that he could do better and that I wasn't a good fit for a wife. Like, please pardon me, which century do we inhabit? Brian, fortunately, ignored her. In any case, the true drama began when he proposed to me. When they learned that we were getting married, Karen and Amanda went utterly crazy. I received separate calls from both of them telling me to return the ring. They actually made an effort to dissuade me from getting married to him. I'm not sure whether they believed they could intimidate me into ending our relationship, but they were completely mistaken. I had no intention of allowing them to rule my life. It was at that point that I became aware of how poisonous Brian's family was. And to be honest, that was only the start. Thus, once Brian proposed, his family's situation truly started to deteriorate. I didn't anticipate them to respond that way, even though I already knew they weren't really in love with me. You would assume that a typical family would be pleased when their son got engaged. Nope, not with Amanda and Karen. They behaved as though I had personally waged war on their family. Karen gave me a call the day following our engagement announcement. I initially believed she could be congratulating me. Try to be kind or something, you know? However, she plunged straight in. She told me straight out that I should return the ring to Brian since she didn't believe I was suitable for her son. Like she was advising me to return a garment that didn't fit, she stated it in such a casual way. For a while, I simply sat there in shock, trying to process the idea that she was asking me to end the engagement. Then she really began to add more. She said that I couldn't care for Brian the way she had, and that he deserved someone from a better family, whatever that meant. The jealousy in her voice was almost audible. She seemed to find the thought of someone else caring for Brian intolerable. And to be honest, that simply made me uneasy. I made an effort to remain composed and informed her that, whether she liked it or not, I loved Brian and that we were getting married. That response did not sit well with her, of course. She went on and on about how I was destroying their family and that if I hadn't influenced Brian, he wouldn't have asked me to marry him. The things she was saying were crazy, really. She seemed to have persuaded herself that I had somehow deceived her son into popping the question. What sort of mother would think that of her own child, for example? I hung up the phone as it was very obvious that nothing I said would make her alter her mind. But to be honest, I felt terrible afterwards. Karen was making it difficult for me to see how we would all get along after this, and I didn't want Brian to feel like he had to pick between his family and me. When I informed Brian about the call later that day, he was equally as furious as I was. He was tired of his mother's treatment of me and couldn't understand why she couldn't just be pleased for us. He assured me that he would speak with her and correct her. Although I knew Karen wasn't the kind to listen, I still liked that. But Brian tried it anyhow. He attempted to speak calmly with her when he phoned. However, based on what I could hear, he was in the adjacent room. Karen's voice is loud, though. It didn't work out. In front of Brian, she was repeating what she had said to me. She informed him that I was seeking his money and that I wasn't the proper girl for him. Just so you know, Brian and I both work and earn around the same salary. That was a lot of money coming from her, and he would regret marrying me. She refused to back down even after Brian assured her that he loved me and that it was his choice. He simply hung up after a while, and we both sat there silently for some time. He was obviously hurt. After all, nobody likes to listen to their mother disparage the person they care about. I knew Brian was on my side, but I also knew how much he loved his family, and I didn't want to be the cause of his connection with them being ruined, so it created this strange tension between us. It was only a mess. However, Amanda chose to become involved as well, so the drama didn't end there. Amanda unexpectedly phoned me a few days following Brian's conversation with Karen. I assumed she was calling to make amends or something, but I didn't know what she wanted. She informed me that I had to return the ring and that she agreed with what her mother stated. "You're not good enough for my brother," she stated bluntly, "and you would let him leave if you truly cared about him. Who even says things like that, really?" She continued by telling me that Brian was making the worst mistake of his life by selecting me and that he deserved to marry someone with elegance. I'd had enough by then. I informed her that she had no say in the matter and that it was her issue if she didn't like it. She appeared surprised that I resisted her, and I'm not sure why. She could have assumed I would simply sit there and take it, but I didn't. I refused to listen to her in such manner. Particularly when I sensed that Brian and I were a good match. Brian was much angrier than before when I informed him about the call. This time, he immediately went to his parents' house to speak with Karen and Amanda face to face. To be honest, I didn't want to be in the midst of that train accident, so I didn't accompany him. He told me it was simply more of the same when he returned. Karen even attempted to guilt trip him by claiming that she only wanted the best for him, but they both reaffirmed their conviction that I wasn't the appropriate person for him. Brian, however, would not have it. He informed them both that they were not need to attend the wedding if they couldn't accept that he was marrying me, whether they liked it or not. They started to backtrack a little, which is why I believe that's when they really recognized how serious he was. Karen even attempted to claim that she had no malicious intent and was only watching out for him. Yes, all right. They kind of backed off at the end, but I knew it wasn't finished. Every time we saw her, Karen became passive-aggressive, saying things like, "Marriage is such a big responsibility, and I need to take care of Brian like she had." She never stopped telling me how much she had done for him as a child, like I had a duty to her. Amanda, on the other hand, simply kept calling me a gold digger in private. When Karen insisted on organizing our rehearsal dinner, things became really adult. I didn't want to allow her at first, but Brian suggested that it could help her feel involved, so I gave in. Something in the back of my mind told me that this was not going to work out. I should have just said no, following my instincts. However, Brian hoped that this would be a nice way to include his mother without adding to the stress. He believed that giving her some influence over anything would help her feel involved, and perhaps even help her relax a little. What could possibly go wrong, I reasoned as I went along. I was going to find out, though. This little relaxed evening before the wedding was intended to be the rehearsal dinner. Only the bridal party and our immediate relatives. Just delicious food, some laughter, and perhaps a few moving speeches, nothing elaborate. Since Karen insisted on doing everything herself, I assumed the lunch would be adequate, even though I wasn't anticipating a Michelin-starred feast or anything. We offered to assist pay for the supper, but she declined, claiming she had everything under control. As soon as we arrived at the location, I realized something was wrong. These inexpensive plastic tablecloths covering picnic tables were the first thing I saw as we entered. Nor am I referring to lovely outdoor picnic tables, the kind you'd find in a public BBQ area or in a park. I was already beginning to feel embarrassed by what appeared to be a hastily prepared arrangement. Brian got this perplexed expression on his face as I looked at him like, "What is this?" However, things grew worse. We discovered the food wasn't even handmade or catered when we sat there. Nope. A depressing buffet of chili tacos, mushy burritos, half-warm nachos, and fast food takeaway was served. It seemed unbelievable to me. This is for rehearsal dinner, so it's not like we were anticipating a 5-star feast. It seemed as though Karen was completely unconcerned. This is what she came up with in the weeks she had to plan it. To be honest, I was trying to remain composed, wishing to avoid making a scene. Karen, however, entered the room grinning and pretended that everything was okay. I just sat there and bit my tongue as she began to tell everyone how much labor she had put into the supper. I didn't say anything since I didn't want to spoil our wedding night, but I was furious inside, guy. Mike, Brian's father, arrived a bit late and was as perplexed as the rest of us when he realized what was happening. I could see he was annoyed, but he sat down quietly and tried to act like he was okay. The fact that everyone felt uneasy, however, seemed to go unnoticed by Karen. She continued to give brief comments on how hard she had worked to make this evening unique. I was only sitting there contemplating. Right now? Are you serious? Then Karen began to drink excessively. She became louder the more she drank. She began to talk endlessly about how hard Brian's marriage was for her. "I can't wait for this to be over," she said again. "And I've had a really difficult time with this wedding." She was the center of attention, as if she were getting married. People were whispering and glancing at each other because it was so embarrassing. I could sense the shame making my cheeks flush. She once stood up and began to thank everyone for attending, nearly toppling a platter of cold nachos in the process. As if she were throwing a big party. And then suddenly she began to sob uncontrollably. She began to talk about her son's death and how she hoped I would look after him because she would no longer be able to. I sat there in disbelief. Brian tried to soothe her, but she refused to listen. It resembled a total breakdown. At last, Mike had enough. He stood up, approached Karen, and politely informed her that it was time to depart. Karen attempted to protest while still crying, but Mike wouldn't listen. She was sobbing and staggering the entire time he had to virtually take her out of there. It was a fiasco, and when they departed, the entire room fell quiet. This was the outcome of our rehearsal dinner, and I was shocked. I was sitting there with Brian. We were both utterly ashamed. The remainder of the visitors attempted to continue as if nothing had occurred, but the atmosphere was destroyed. Amanda also wasn't very helpful. She attempted to excuse Karen by claiming that she was simply upset over her baby boy's marriage, but I didn't buy it. Karen wasn't just acting sentimental. This was Karen attempting to make our wedding into her own drama fest and making everything about herself once more. Brian and I walked home after the meal, and I told him straight out that if his mother and sister could ruin a simple rehearsal dinner, I was concerned about what they would do after the wedding. On the wedding day itself. What were they intending to do? I wasn't so sure, but Brian attempted to tell me that his dad would keep them in line. He made an effort to be upbeat, which I appreciated, but I wasn't ready to take any chances after what had transpired that evening. I was also annoyed that Brian seemed oblivious to the extent of his family's problems. I knew this was more serious than a single bad night, but he kept dismissing it as such. I was simply waiting for the other shoe to drop during the wedding since Karen and Amanda had been ruining everything from the beginning. I had trouble sleeping that night. All I could think about was how Karen and Amanda were going to spoil our special day, and my mind was racing. I didn't want my wedding to be a circus, but I also didn't want to come across as a bridezilla. I continued to mentally rehearse every situation, speculating about all the ways things could go wrong. Nor was it only about me. I didn't want his family to cause a scene during the wedding since I knew it would break Brian's heart. However, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that something was about to occur. I simply knew, but I had no idea what it was. The rehearsal dinner ended up being a complete catastrophe, but it served as a wake-up call for me. I had to find out how to keep our wedding day from turning into another one of Karen and Amanda's theatrical outbursts since they weren't going to back down. Though I had no clue what was going to happen next, I wish I could say that was the worst of it. Even though I was on guard, it wasn't enough to have me ready for what was going to happen. I kept thinking that they wouldn't simply relax and let us have a quiet day. Considering the outcome of the rehearsal dinner, if they could sabotage anything as basic as that is. At the wedding itself, what were they planning to do? Brian and I got into our first serious argument the night before the wedding. Although we had experienced some difficult times with his family, we had always supported one another. But I was at my breaking point this time. I was quite clear with him that I didn't want his sister or mother to attend the wedding. I was unwilling to accept the chance, even though I knew it seemed crazy given all the antics they had performed. I didn't want our special day to become a circus because Amanda wanted to play protective sister again, or because Karen couldn't tolerate not being the focus of attention. But he wasn't having it, Brian. Even after everything his family had done, he couldn't comprehend the thought of them not being there at the wedding. "They're my family," he said, "and they won't ruin it. Dad will make sure they behave." I wasn't persuaded, though. I informed him that it was more than simply our wedding if they were present. Karen and Amanda were about to get yet another chance to make it all about themselves. For a time, the talk veered off topic. He persisted in insulting them while attempting to minimize the severity of the situation, but I refused to back down. I didn't want to look back on my wedding day regretting letting Karen and Amanda get away with more foolishness since I knew deep down that they couldn't be trusted. At last, I simply put it out there. I informed him that there wouldn't be a wedding if they attended. I realize that seems dramatic, but I was worn out by that time. I was at my breaking point with them. Brian gave me a look as if I had just given him a face slap. I could see he was hurt. I felt terrible. However, I was also aware that I wouldn't spend my wedding day being cautious, waiting for Karen to do something unexpected, or anticipating another altercation with Amanda. I had to convey to him my seriousness about this. He took a long time to comprehend what I was saying. To be honest, I wasn't envious of him since I could see how he was struggling, divided between his family and myself. I am aware of his closeness to his father. I knew this was him, and so did Mike. Ultimately, though, I was his future wife, and I wanted him to put us before the mayhem. His mother and sister continued to enter our lives. He finally let out a sigh, and I could see he had decided on something. Despite his displeasure, he consented. The next morning, he informed his father over the phone that Karen and Amanda had not been invited. I wasn't shocked that Mike wasn't surprised. Even he, I believe, realized in his heart that Karen and Amanda were too much to bear. Mike assured Brian that he would ensure their absence. To be honest, I had a slight wave of relief. However, I was also aware that this was not the end of it. As expected, Karen and Amanda began blowing up Brian's phone shortly after that conversation. They tried to guilt-trip him into allowing them to attend the wedding by phoning and messaging him constantly. From the other side of the room, I could hear Karen accuse me of destroying their relationship by turning Brian against her. She went on to say that Brian was making a big mistake by excluding them and that I was a horrible influence. Amanda wasn't any better, accusing me of attempting to take her brother away from their entire family. It was so foreseeable. Listening to that, I nearly rolled my eyes, but Brian held his ground, and to be honest, I was really proud of him at the time. Standing up to his mother and sister in that way was not easy for him, but he did it. He made it clear to them that they were not wanted at the wedding due to their treatment of me and their disregard for our relationship from the beginning. They had to accept it for once, since he left no space for disagreement. However, that didn't stop Karen from making one more remark before the call ended. She launched into a tirade about how I was the true victim in this situation, how I was causing her to lose her kid, and how I had tricked Brian into excluding her from his life. She replied, "You'll regret this decision," which truly annoyed me despite the fact that everything was so dramatic and exaggerated. "You'll be sorry you put her ahead of your family." That struck a chord. However, I held my tongue. I refused to allow her to pull me into her drama. Brian and I just sat there in quiet for a while after the calls eventually ceased. Processing everything. I felt horrible for placing him in that situation, since I could tell he was having trouble processing what had just transpired. I knew it was the correct call, though. We deserved to enjoy this day free from his family's further mayhem. Even though everything went off without a hitch, the wedding day itself was stunning. I spent the whole morning feeling anxious. I was almost expecting Amanda or Karen to arrive and cause trouble. However, they didn't. Mike was really encouraging and arrived as promised. He made it a point to express his happiness for Brian and me, even though it was obvious that he didn't agree with the way Karen and Amanda had been acting. After all of the drama, that meant a lot to me. For the first time in months, we were surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us and wanted to share our happiness, so we held the ideal ceremony. I felt as though I could breathe once again. There was just love, laughing, and a great deal of relief. No disruptions, no passive-aggressive remarks, no meltdowns. It exceeded my expectations in every way. Fortunately, Karen and Amanda didn't turn up, although I subsequently learned that they had meant to. After the wedding, some of Brian's cousins informed me that Karen and Amanda had been considering wearing white to the ceremony as a statement piece. Yes, what you just read is true. At my own wedding, they aimed to overshadow me. It was one of those times when I felt grateful that I had followed my gut. Who knows what kind of mayhem they would have caused by the end of the night if we hadn't invited them. I was simply appreciative. I'm thankful Brian defended me. I'm thankful that the day was so lovely. And thankful that for at least a short time, I wouldn't have to put up with Karen and Amanda's bullshit. Although I was aware that the drama with them would not end permanently, it was ideal for the day. After a few years, things appeared to settle down. After much saving and hard work, Brian and I were able to purchase our first home. We had been aiming for it for years, so it was a big deal to us. It felt like a huge accomplishment when we received the keys, as if we had finally constructed something that was exclusively ours. I didn't invite Karen or Amanda to our small housewarming party, which was attended by close friends and a few family members. I wasn't eager to deal with them again after everything that transpired at the wedding. Of course, they found out about the house eventually. A few weeks later, Karen and Amanda dropped by to see the place, though I made sure I wasn't around for most of it. Brian showed them the house and told me later that the visit had been awkward but brief. I thought that would be the end of it and maybe we'd keep our distance for good. But no. No. I should have known better. One afternoon, out of nowhere, Karen called me. It was honestly weird because we hadn't spoken since the wedding. The moment I saw her name pop up on my phone, I had this bad feeling in my gut. I hesitated for a second, but figured I'd better answer it just to see what she wanted. At first, she tried to play nice. She asked how I was doing and made some small talk, asking how Brian and I were liking the new house. But I could tell something was off. She was way too friendly, and it just didn't feel genuine. And then she dropped it. Out of nowhere, she informed me that Amanda was pregnant again, her 6th child, and that because Amanda's family was struggling financially, Brian and I should give up our house to them. At first, I didn't even know how to answer. I just sat there stunned, trying to figure out if she was kidding or if I'd heard her. So I questioned her, "Are you serious?" And Karen, without skipping a beat, answered, "Sure." She was dead serious. She went on to explain how Amanda's house was too tiny for her expanding family, and how it only made sense for us to give up our home as it was too huge for just Brian and me. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. I asked her why on earth she believed we should just hand over our house, and that's when she added the kicker. She believes that Brian had previously consented to it. That set me off. I knew that was a lie. Brian and I had always made decisions together, and there was no way he would have guaranteed something like that without talking to me first. I felt my blood start to boil. I told her clear out that this was our house, the one we had worked hard to acquire. Furthermore, we were not going to give it up to anybody. I made it very apparent that Brian and I worked together to make choices, and he would never consent to such a thing without first talking to me. Naturally, Karen was not amenable to it. She began to rage at me, claiming that I had a responsibility to accommodate Amanda and her children as her daughter-in-law. Similar to what? Since when have I been responsible for resolving Amanda's financial issues? I was finished with her then. No sense. I jokingly informed her that she could pay the mortgage for us if she was so committed to assisting Amanda. After all, someone had to pay the bills if Amanda and her family were going to reside here, right? That didn't sit well with Karen. She erupted, screaming that I was being egotistical and irrational and that it wasn't her job. But to be honest, I was astounded by the whole thing's chutzpah. It seemed unbelievable to me that she believed she could simply demand that we give up our house and bulldoze us like that once her tirade was over. I hung up after politely telling her that we were done talking. I informed Brian what had happened as soon as he got home that night. He was enraged. He confirmed exactly what I already knew and hadn't heard anything about all of this. He would never agree to give up our house, especially if he didn't speak to me first. Initially. He immediately contacted his mother, and I could sense the annoyance in his voice as he reprimanded her. Brian didn't accept Karen's attempt to backpedal. He assured her that we weren't going to give up our house for anyone and that we weren't accountable for Amanda's troubles. The narrative is over. Things between Brian and his mother were even more tense after that call. But to be honest, I didn't give a damn. We had fought so hard for this, and I was not going to allow anyone to shame me into giving it up. It just served to highlight Karen and Amanda's entitlement once more. They pretended that Brian and I were only there to solve their issues, and I was tired of playing that game. I saw right away that we needed to establish some firm limits. Karen and Amanda needed to realize that there were repercussions if they continued to act in such a way, and so be it if it meant severing their connection once more. A week or so later, Karen and Amanda made the decision to go farther. I suppose they believed that by unexpectedly visiting our home, Brian might reconsider. As if they had the right to enter our area anytime they wanted, they pounded on the door and demanded to be let in. From the other side of the door, I could hear Karen yelling at me and calling me a variety of derogatory things. Amanda was not far behind, accusing me of robbing their family of Brian. However, I refused to accept it. The door was not opened by me. Through the door, I informed them that this was our house, not theirs, and that they had to leave. It was absurd that they believed they could just re-enter our lives by force. They continued to shout, bang, and make a commotion, but I wouldn't interact with them anymore. Shortly later, Brian arrived home and was incensed at what he witnessed. There was no hesitation on his part. He went straight to the door and warned them bluntly that we would contact the police if they ever returned to our house in this manner. They eventually departed after that, but not before insulting me a few times in the dying moments, so I assumed they were taken aback by how firm he was. We haven't spoken to Karen or Amanda since that day, and to be honest, I don't miss it at all. I feel as though a tremendous burden has been removed, in a long time, for the first time. Without his poisonous family's continual meddling, Brian and I can truly concentrate on our lives together. No more drama, guilt-tripping, or passive-aggressive texts. Just tranquility. But for Brian, it has not been simple. Although he has come to the realization that loving his mother and sister does not include allowing them to dominate us, I am aware that he still loves them in spite of everything. Establishing those limits has strengthened our bond and provided us with the room we needed to develop our own lives. For now, I'm simply grateful that Brian and I are no longer dealing with the craziness that Karen and Amanda brought into our lives, even if I'm not sure whether we'll ever be in a relationship with them again. In all honesty, we feel as though we have finally taken charge of our own narrative. Furthermore, I wouldn't exchange that for anything.